And honestly, Canon, we really need an RF version of this lens. So here it is, we finally have an RF 85mm 1.4 prime lens, and in today's video we're going to compare it to some of the competition. So I think that the most obvious one that I really want to test this new lens against is of course the RF 85mm 1.2. Now I think this is probably the best prime lens that Canon's ever made, and I used to own it for a long time. I do miss it sometimes, so I'm interested to see how close this new lens gets. And I'm also gonna put it up against the RF 85mm f2 STM prime lens. So this is actually my 85mm prime right now, and a bit of an underrated one. So I'm interested to see how these two compare. I'm also gonna be comparing it to the EF 85mm 1.4 prime, which is a lens that I really like. And finally, a bit of a wild card, but a lens that you guys recommend to me all the time, the Sigma 85mm 1.4 art lens. So let's get straight into it and let's find out if this 85 1.4 VCM lens was really worth the wait. Right, let's start off with a headshot on each lens and let's look at the difference in rendering between these primes. So here is the new 1.4 VCM prime, and I just love how it looks. It's very contrasty, you can see it's really detailed, and I think the bokeh looks really nice as well. Let's put it up against the amazing RF 1.2 though, which despite that very small difference in aperture, the background is just a lot smoother, with smoother focus fall off as well. And it's maybe even actually a little bit more contrasty compared to this new VCM lens. Let's compare it now to the f2 STM prime, and although the f2 lens has a bit less pop and less of a 3D look because of that slower aperture, I still think that this shot looks great, and I actually kind of like f2 a little bit more for headshots because you get just a little bit more in focus, so I think this lens looks great. Here's the RF 1.4 lens up against the EF 1.4 lens, and straight away, the new lens I think is more contrasty and has kind of a more crisp look to it, I think. But I do think that the bokeh looks quite a bit smoother on the EF version, so we'll take a closer look at that later on. Now against the Sigma art lens, this Sigma again, it looks great, and I'd again say it probably has slightly smoother bokeh compared to this new RF 1.4 lens. Here's all our results on screen now, so just pause if you need to take a longer look. Now the biggest obvious thing I noticed when comparing all of these lenses on the day was that they're all actually slightly different focal lengths, so pretty annoying when you're trying to do a comparison like this, but in practice, the RF 85 1.2 for example is much more zoomed in compared to this new RF 85 1.4. Here's all of the lenses on a tripod on screen so you can see the difference in field of view that each lens gives you. I often think that that's why the RF 85 1.2 has such a wow factor to it compared to other 85mm primes, because yes, it's got that fast aperture of course, which really helps, but also because it's a tighter focal length, you just get more background separation and more compression in the image, so that just makes it stand out against other primes. And here's just another quick look at a couple more headshots, now just from our 3 choices of RF lenses, so let me know if you can spot which one of these is f1.2. So here's the results, pretty easy probably, but ultimately all of these lenses look fantastic for headshots, and I'd happily use any of these lenses in terms of their rendering. I think they all look great for headshots, but if you do want the absolute dreamiest look for your portrait lens for headshots, then well, so far the RF 85 f1.2 lens is definitely delivering. Let's move on now to some mid-length shots, and let's see how well this new 1.4 VCM prime can separate our subject from a fairly busy background. And here's the shot, and again I just love how this 1.4 VCM looks for this kind of a shot. Again, it is very contrasting, you can just see that there's a very clean look to it, but at the same time it's got plenty of pop. But it's not until you put it against the RF 1.2 version that you really see just how amazing the rendering is from that lens though, because just pick anywhere in the background, in the autofocus background, and it just looks significantly smoother on the RF 85 1.2. You might not love that look though, sometimes I don't. I think that the 1.2 can have a little bit of a kind of cardboard cutout look, where Rachel can look really separate from the background, like in this image, whereas the 1.4 prime, it still has plenty of pop, but it just looks a little bit more flat, and maybe a little bit more realistic, but both of these primes look great and it's just personal preference. Now here's the new prime next to the f2 prime, and I think the 1.4 VCM obviously has more pop, also more contrast, and the difference between 1.4 and f2 in a kind of mid-length busy shot like this is pretty significant in terms of background blur. Here's the RF 1.4 VCM versus the EF 1.4 lens, and yeah, I think the EF version does have smoother bokeh. It's not really a huge difference, but it just gives it more of a dreamy, more organic look, I feel. And up against the Sigma Art, again, the Sigma's bokeh might be smoother still, even over the Canon EF lens. These EF lenses, I think, have a really nice look to them. They are a little bit less contrasty, and they could well be less sharp as well. We'll check that out later, but for now, let's take a look at all of our mid-length results side by side. And one thing that I'm also noticing consistently and always have is the warmer look to the RF85 1.2. I always notice this even the 50mm 1.2, and I think it really helps these 1.2 lenses have a more flattering, pleasing look in portraits in particular. Here's just a couple more mid-length shots, and this time I put a bit of foreground bokeh in the shot, and again, all of them look great when you look at them all side by side. I don't think any of them have anything weird going on, even in the out of focus elements in the foreground, which can be pretty tough for any prime, and even the older EF lenses handle this absolutely fine. The new VCM does seem to strike, I think, a really nice balance between a clean, modern, kind of sharp, contrasty look with pleasing enough bokeh and nice enough character. Whereas the EF lenses seem to sacrifice a little bit of that contrast and clarity for smoother, more dreamy rendering, in my opinion. I have to praise the Sigma in particular though, because I think its subject isolation is very impressive. And I actually think out of all these lenses, it gets the closest to the RF85 1.2, thanks to it having a little bit smoother bokeh compared to the rest. But still, as usual, like I said, the RF85 1.2 just simply exceeds when it comes to subject separation in portraits. Now onto full length shots, again with some out of focus foreground elements in the photograph as well. So here's the 85 1.4 VCM next to the RF 85 1.2, and again, the 1.2 lens just smooths out the foreground quite a bit better, I think, thanks to that 1.2 aperture. It just adds just a touch more depth to a full length shot in particular. That's where it really stands out for me. I've always felt like the RF85 1.2 is easily the best lens I've ever used for full-length portraits if you want tons of 3D pop. Here's our VCM prime next to the RF85mm f2, and it's not actually a huge difference to be honest, but of course, the f2 lens loses a bit of the pop that you get from the RF VCM lens. Next, let's look at our EF primes, and again, I could be wrong, but I think the two EF lenses look smoother, not just in the foreground out of focus elements, but in the background too. I just kind of feel like they transition into the out of focus background a little bit smoother and a little bit sooner compared to this new RF 85mm 1.4 lens, and that just provides a full length shot a little bit more of a pleasing look, I think. But here they are all together. Let me know what you guys think. So overall, out of the three RF lenses, I do feel like for full length shots, the difference between them are actually pretty significant. If you do shoot a lot of full length portraits, the RF 1.2 just really stands out in my opinion. It just has the most magic to it. But the new 1.4 VCM also does a great job and is a significant step up, I think, compared to the RF 85mm f2 in terms of full rendering of full length portraits at least. But overall, focusing on the RF 85mm 1.4 VCM and comparing it to the other primes today, I am really happy with the overall look of this lens. I just feel like it's got that really flattering rendering that you want for portraits from an 85mm prime. I think the bokeh is nice enough for a modern, clean lens. And for somebody who does own the RF 85mm f2, I think this feels like a very significant step up for me. But let's find out if it's sharp. Let's go back to our headshots and compare the new VCM prime to the rest of our prime lenses. And all of the tests that you're going to see, or all of the images today, were shot on my Canon R5 Mark II. And first up, let's compare it to the RF 85 1.2, which might just be the sharpest lens I've ever used on RF mount. So this will be a big test for the new lens. And side by side, I think they are very, very close, and I would struggle to pick a winner. but I'll say that the RF85 1.2 might just be a little bit more bitingly sharp if you really zoom in. You know, if you check out the eyelashes, for example, at this kind of a crop, I think it's kind of obvious. But it is great to see that this new RF85 1.4 is getting close to the 1.2, which is just an incredibly sharp lens. But don't sleep on the f2 version, because as you can see, side by side against the new lens, sharpness has really never been this lens's weakness, and I'd say it's only a touch behind the new RF 85mm 1.4. This f2 prime really is fantastic in terms of sharpness. And here's our RF 1.4 lens up against the EF 1.4 prime. And it's actually pretty close, but I'll say the RF 1.4 prime is sharper, showing a bit more detail in the eyes and the skin, and it has just a little bit more micro contrast to it in general. And that softness we see in the EF lens could explain some of the smoother bokeh and rendering that we saw earlier. The RF 85 1.4 versus the Sigma Prime shows that the new lens is quite a bit of a step up. It's just more detailed, it's clearer, and it's cleaner. So if you're upgrading from any of these EF lenses, I think you'll see a pretty significant upgrade in sharpness. So if that's what you want, considering of course this is a portrait lens, you might not want ultimate sharpness, but anyway, here's all of our results on screen so you can see for yourself the difference in sharpness between these lenses. And if I had to rank them, I'd put the 1.2 prime in first place, with the VCM prime just behind it. The RF f2 is an easy third place for me, with the Canon EF 1.4 being in fourth and the Sigma being in last place. But overall, just between the RF lenses, sharpness is just so close between these lenses that I really don't think, for portraits in particular, it really should be a huge deciding factor when deciding which of these lenses to pick. Let's take a very quick look at corners, because I must admit, on an 85mm fast prime like this, I'm not sure how much the corners matter, but anyway, let's take a look. So if we put the new 85 1.4 VCM against the RF 85 1.2, they are very similar in the corners. Maybe the new lens is slightly better if we look at the text in the corner, but the 1.2 prime is definitely cleaner in terms of chromatic aberration, as you can see. Against the f2 STM prime, the new 1.4 VCM is sharper in the corners as well as cleaner in regards to chromatic aberration. The Canon EF 85 1.4 really surprised me though in the corners. It is great. I'd say it's just a slight step behind the new 85 1.4, but again, it does suffer from quite a bit more chromatic aberration, so the new lens is way better corrected. Weirdly, the Sigma looked great in the corners. I'd say almost as good as the new 85 1.4. It looks really clean and clear and contrasty, but again, does struggle a bit with chromatic aberration, as you can see. So overall, all of these lenses are more than sharp enough for portraits in my opinion, and I do feel like the EF lenses have a really nice organic look to them, but you do sacrifice a little bit of ultimate sharpness compared to these more modern RF lenses. So it's all down to personal preference, which look you prefer, and you know, for an 85mm prime, we have a lot of great choices. So if you really want to pixel peep and figure out which might be best for you, you can download some of the raw files from today's video and take a look for yourself. Now let's take a quick look at in-camera corrections, and this new 85 1.4 lens is actually pretty well corrected in terms of distortion, with only really minor adjustments needed in post when applied. But you can see there's very heavy vignette which is having to be corrected in post. No worse though than the f1.2 RF prime, which requires about the same amount of correction in regards to vignette, but has very little need for distortion correction. Now in terms of photo autofocus, this new RF 85 1.4 VCM is just like all of the other VCM lenses I've tried, in that it is super fast, it focuses pretty much instantly in photo, it is super accurate, and it does it all pretty much silently. In comparison, the RF 85 1.2 is a bit slower in photo and quite a bit noisier. You can feel it moving those heavy elements inside, and you can hear it doing it as well, especially in comparison to the new lens. Now, it's nothing too bad, you're not going to really notice it on most photo shoots, but it is a step down overall in terms of autofocus performance, definitely. The RF 85 f2 is definitely the slowest. It's not terrible really for most applications, especially for portraits, but if you do miss focus or something like that, it can take a long time to regain focus, and it is a very noisy lens as well, so it's just not my favorite lens for any kind of fast action. The EF Canon 85 1.4 performs great actually. I'd probably put it second place, even better than the RF 1.2. It is very fast, very accurate, and it's mostly silent as well. The Sigma lens also really surprised me. It focuses pretty fast. It's a bit noisy to be fair, but in terms of performance, it might again beat out both the RF85 f2 and the f1.2 lens, to be honest. Overall though, I found that on the day, all of these lenses performed flawlessly really when it came to portraits. Even the Sigma lens did a great job tracking Rachel's eye, no matter what. I just never really had to interfere with any of these lenses in terms of photo autofocus, so great results from all of these lenses. And looking at video autofocus, as you'd expect from one of Canon's hybrid VCM lenses, this new lens focuses laser fast, and it is super smooth when racking focus. Maybe not quite as fast as some of the other VCM lenses I've tried, but still, it is giving out an absolute excellent performance with practically zero focus breathing as well. And again, it operates absolutely silently. You can't hear anything from this lens. And it is quite a bit faster than the RF85 1.2, which has never really been a favorite of mine for video because it's quite loud and a bit clunky when focusing. The RF85 f2 is very, very slow in terms of video autofocus and exhibits a lot of focus breathing too, and it is very loud. The Canon EF 1.4 is actually great. It's almost as fast as the new lens, to be fair, just maybe not quite as accurate, and it is slightly noisier as well, but still quieter than the two other RF lenses. Again, the Sigma is pretty good too. It surprised me in video, to be honest. It's generally a great performer, very fast and accurate, but it's quite loud with quite a distracting, strange, crackly kind of noise when it's operating. Even when you're not racking focus, it's still pretty noisy. Overall, this new RF85 1.4, just like the other VCM primes, seem like really great options for video. Now, I don't generally use an 85 prime for video, other than for maybe like a talking head interview setup, but in the short time I have used this lens on this shoot, it just simply performed flawlessly in video, even if unfortunately Canon decided not to include image stabilization in this lens like they did with the EF version, so that's a real shame. I'd have loved to have seen them carry that over into this new lens. Now let's take a look at the build and handling of all of these lenses, but let's focus first on the new RF85 1.4. And there's not a lot to discuss because its design is probably already very familiar to you, as it joins the VCM kind of hybrid line of prime lenses, and it shares the exact same design as those other primes. So this means it has a dedicated function button on the barrel of the lens, which is great, and it also has an iris ring. And overall, it is a really lightweight and small lens considering its wide aperture and great performance, weighing just 630 grams. It handles excellently on the R5 Mark II and is the smallest and lightest out of all of the lenses that I tested today, aside from the RF85mm f2. And size, weight and handling were all really big deciding factors for me as to why I ultimately decided to let go of the RF85mm 1.2. And this new lens does handle a whole lot nicer, and it's going to be just so much nicer to use over long photo shoots, you know, for weddings and events and things like that, where you've got this on your camera over a long day shooting. It's the same when you compare this new lens to the EF primes, because once you put the adapter on those lenses, they become pretty large front heavy lenses that just don't handle that nicely, unfortunately. It's also pretty impressive how close in size and weight this new lens gets to the f2 prime, weighing just about 100 grams more than this one. So considering that big jump in performance, I think that's pretty impressive. I'll put the weights of all of these lenses on the screen so you can see the difference. You might just want to add another 100 grams or so to the EF lenses to account for the adapter. Overall, this new VCM lens is weather sealed, it feels very well built and very premium. And it does have that rattle, just like all of the other VCM lenses, but again, goes away when you attach it to a camera and power it on. So price-wise, here in the UK, I just bought this new lens for around £1,600. So that's a pretty significant saving over the very expensive RF85 1.2, which here in the UK, brand new, costs almost double that, just about £3,000. The RF85 f2 is a bargain though. It's easily found for around £500 when it's on sale, and is an absolute excellent buy. Same for both of the EF lenses. You can pick them up here used now easily for around £700, and sometimes the Sigma quite a bit less than that, closer to £500. So, final thoughts. Am I going to keep this lens? Well, I think I'm gonna. which means I'll be selling my Canon RF 85mm f2, because for me, I feel like this is a pretty significant step up in image quality and just overall look for portraits, while still having a pretty compact and lightweight design that just feels great to use, and that's really important to me these days. It is, of course, early days, but so far I'm really happy with how the photos are looking from this lens. Now, I wouldn't say it's got the most remarkable rendering or anything like that, especially when you put it against the 1.2, which just looks unbelievably good. But at the same time, there's really nothing to complain about. It's very sharp, very contrasty with great colors, and plenty of background separation for me and my style of shooting for portraits. And that's without even mentioning the absolutely exceptional autofocus performance. I do just wish they kept IS in this lens like we had in the original EF version. It's a real shame that Canon dropped that in this, because it's a hybrid VCM prime, so it just feels like it would make it way more useful for video. I do still feel like though, if 85mm is your absolute go-to prime and your favorite focal length, then the 1.2 version is always going to be worth considering and is still probably overall the better lens. And it just has more of a wow factor, but it is huge and it's expensive. And I think for people like me, where 85mm is kind of just another prime in the kit, I think this new lens is more of a sensible buy. And the f2 version and the two EF versions are even more sensible buys, to be honest. If you want to get the absolute most bang for your buck, well, none of them are slouches in the image quality department. They all look fantastic. But let me know what you guys think of this new RF 85mm 1.4 VCM. Was it a letdown for you, or did it live up to the hype, and was it worth the wait? Let me know down in the comments what you think of this new lens. I'm hoping to spend a bit more time with this new 85 1.4 and release more of a kind of dedicated follow-up review. So do let me know in the comments below if you have any questions about this lens, anything you want me to test out. Put it in the comments and I'll do my best. But anyway, that is it for me. Hopefully this video was helpful. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.